There, it says it's now broadcasting.
Okay.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock and Kyle and Lisa are here to help today, and they are letting people into the webinar. So we're going to give it just a minute or two here. We have 60 people registered this morning, so we want to get started as soon as possible. And we'll kind of wait as the numbers build up here. We'll kind of do a few housekeeping things. If you haven't attended one of these webinars before, you are all automatically on mute. If you have questions as we go along, there is a raise your hand button that you can hit, and Kyle and Lisa are monitoring that, and we'll find an appropriate time to let me know there's questions. There's also a chat feature that you can type in a question if you'd like to do that. And then at the very end, we'll try to leave enough time, hopefully, that we have enough for questions and answers. And there's also a question and answer. But if you'd like to speak, you need to use the raise your hand feature, and Kyle or Lisa will unmute you so you can ask your question verbally. So are we ready to get started, Kyle and Lisa? I did not hear that. We're good. Okay. So this morning, we're going to talk about design. And as you all know, design is one of the 4 points in the Main Street 4-point approach. And what are we talking about when we talk about design? Design, an effective design program led by a dedicated group of volunteers knowledgeable of Main Street design issues, is an essential part of the comprehensive revitalization of your commercial district. Good design sends positive messages about the district being a special, high-quality place. So I wanted to start this morning and give you some examples. And so I'm going to tell you a bit about my story and how I got started into Main Street. And it all centered around this historic house. It's called the Gill House. If you want to Google it and look it up, it's in Galion, Ohio, which is my hometown. And this house stood there for, it's over 100 years old. I lived 2 blocks west of this house. And so I grew up kind of going past it and being mystified by it for a lot of my childhood. And all of a sudden one day I read in the newspaper where Taco Bell had decided they were going to purchase that property and tear it down and build this beautiful building. And that's how I got started into this field. And if you as just a regular person who has no training whatsoever in design, look at this building and then look at this building, that kind of gives you an idea of, you don't have any training. You know that isn't a better product that you're getting with that. So I got involved in a local group of people who were actually trying to save that house. And I had never really actually heard about historic preservation before. I knew I liked old buildings. I knew I liked historic and old stuff, but I didn't know what historic preservation is. And that's pretty much where a lot of us start in this field. Preservation is not something that we're taught necessarily. And so most people don't know what preservation is. And so one of the first things that you need to learn about in the preservation field is the Secretary of Interior standards for historic properties. And the Secretary of Interior is housed in the National Park Service in the U.S. Department of the Interior. And they are the keepers of the National Register of Historic Places, not historical places, historic places. One of my pet peeves, sorry. But you can go online and you can see here, you go to nps.gov, and the technical briefs are there that lists the Secretary of Interior standards. And when we're working with historic properties in Main Street, pretty much in life, if you're involved in any kind of local historic preservation effort in your own communities, we work with the 10 standards that are put out by the National Park Service. And we're not going to go into that a lot today. That's a whole other training. I would encourage you, if you feel like you don't know a lot about historic preservation, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Kathy Beck, you can reach out to your local historic preservation officers. Here in Orlando, it's Heather Bonds, and many of your communities have your own historic preservation officers, and you can talk to them about how to learn more. So when we talk about historic preservation, we're talking about much more than just saving old buildings. When I got started in Main Street about 28 years ago now, that's pretty much all we talked about was the buildings. Everything was about the buildings. And, you know, a lot of us, especially in Florida, don't have, you know, these great monumental gingerbready historic buildings like they have in the Northeast. And when I moved to Orlando, a lot of the people that I worked with here at the city of Orlando were from New York and New Jersey and places like that. And when I talked about a building being historic here, they thought I was crazy. We have to remember that history has to do with where we are. And the history of your community, your state, is different than what it is in other places. And so Florida wasn't settled and wasn't built up at the same time as other places. And so we go by what our histories are. So I always talk about my people here in Orlando when we do our annual evaluations and we talk about historic preservation. It's a challenge for us here. We don't have a lot of historic buildings left in Orlando. A lot of that history has already been erased. We have some great ones left, but we just don't have a large number of them. So it's a challenge. What are we talking about when we're talking about historic preservation? And I think the field has morphed a little bit into talking about more than just the buildings themselves. Historic preservation talks about place and telling the stories of the past. Every community has its own story of how it was settled, who settled it, why they settled it, why did they choose there. And all of those stories enhance the sense of community that we have that bring all of us closer together. So making sure that you are exploring those histories and bringing them into all that you do in Main Street is one of the unique positioning statements type things that will set you apart from other Main Street districts, because even though we have 10 different neighborhoods here in Orlando, every single neighborhood was also developed with a whole different history, a whole different group of people, different foods, different cultures, different landmarks, different landscapes, different monuments, and different people. And all of those things are a part of our history and historic preservation. So when we talk about getting involved in this, you know, we are saving monuments and landscapes in neighborhoods, but it doesn't have to be complicated. We don't have to put ourselves in chains and chain ourselves to trees and buildings and things like that. Sometimes we do have to do that. Trust me, we were going to do that with that house that I started out with. But sometimes there's more to historic preservation than just trying to simply save something. So here's some examples from the National Trust. Have you ever taken a house museum tour? Have you ever shopped in your local stores on Main Street? If you're doing that, you're just shopping in those stores on Main Street, you're participating in historic preservation because you are helping those businesses survive, which means they'll be able to pay their rents, which means the people who own the buildings will be able to maintain them and they'll stay there. And so that's a part of historic preservation. Have you volunteered at a historic site or a community event? Have you stopped to appreciate the great architecture in your community? When I was a Main Street director, we had great architecture in my downtown. And we used to give architectural walking tours to third graders every year. The buses would roll in and we'd take them on tours of downtown Mansfield, and we'd tell them to look up. Look up at the tops of the buildings, look at the parapets, look at the dental molding. Why is it called dental molding? Because it resembles your teeth. So those are all important things to just appreciate the different architecture. One thing I learned really early on as a Main Street coordinator when I traveled to all of the cities in Ohio over the 6 years I did that job, I learned that the architecture in every single city was unique and it was different. And one of the things that I found was a lot of those historic buildings had faces that were in the buildings. And I still have never found out the answer to the question, but I would have loved to have been able to sit and do research and learn more about what all those different faces were, where they came from, and why were they on those buildings. So there's a lot of great things to learn from the architecture that's around you. Detouring from the highway when you're on vacation and following historic site markers and doing walking tours and actually reading them. We were in Ybor City recently, and there's a lot of site markers there with a lot of information on things that happened there. And it's interesting to read them and to learn. All of that together is a part of historic preservation. So even though historic preservation has been the foundation of Main Street since day one, Main Street was birthed from the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the Chicago headquarters office. Mary Means is the mother of Main Street. She's on the National Main Street Board at this time. She was the person who kind of pulled this all together. And, you know, when we talk about historic preservation being our foundation and our roots, Main Street is really an economic development program. And historic preservation is just one of the many tools that we have in our toolbox to get this done. But it is one of the things that sets Main Street apart from other economic development programs that do downtown or business district revitalization. So when we talk about the 4 points and we set people up on a design team or design committee, or they're looking at their transformation strategies and what portion of that strategy is going to be covered by design, there are specific responsibilities that are underneath that point that we should be making sure we're covering under design. So what are those? The first is educating people about good design. Just like I said, the difference between that, 8,000 square foot historic house and a Taco Bell, that is just good design. If you are going to get a Taco Bell or a McDonald's or some other kind of chain or something like that, how do you make sure what you get is good design and not just the standard that they build everywhere all over Generica? So we have to make sure that what we're doing is educating the people that are doing design in our districts and making sure that we enhance the image of our districts overall. We're trying to make it look better. We're not trying to make it look the same as everywhere else. Providing good design advice on improvements to private properties and public spaces. We're going to have the City of Orlando planners talk to you sometime in October about what is the difference between the Main Street Design Committee and your city planners. And one of the things is working together as a team. Your city probably has design standards, or they work with the Florida building codes. Those things are important to keep in mind, but there are things that you can do. I'll give you an example. I'm not a planner. I'm not trained as a planner. But the planners here will often ask me to sit in on pre-planning meetings that they have with people coming in to do projects in our main streets. And when they do that, they often have me talk with the planners or talk with the developers or the property owners about what they're doing, because planners are looking at the building codes, they're looking at the rules, they're looking at all of those things that they have to keep track of with the city. But in Main Street, we're looking at a little bit broader perspective. And as a Main Street professional, when I sit in on those pre-planning meetings, I'm looking at, are we getting any street trees on this site? We have issues here in Orlando that Most of our main streets are on FDOT right away, and they're not always thrilled about having trees. And so when that happens, we try to get the property owners, when they're doing new development or redevelopment on their sites, to plant trees on the backside of the sidewalk, since we can't get them in the Devil Strip near the street. But we can get them on their property. And so sometimes they haven't even thought about that. And we say, can you plant another tree or two? Can you do a tree kind of wall so we get shade? You know, what kind of trees are we going to get? Those are some of the things that you can do with good design advice on your design committee. Planning Main Street's development is important because oftentimes you can develop your own incentives and you can target those key properties. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. When I was a Main Street director, we were very fortunate that we had a pretty good budget. And we decided that, you know, the city really didn't have a very robust facade program. And so we decided we were going to start our own facade program. And we only had $5,000. I think the maximum that we had was a $10,000 or I think a $20,000 grant that they could get. It was a 1-to-1 match. And we put up the money every year, and we could only do so many. I think we only did 3 a year. So, you know, if you're doing $20,000, you can only do 3 a year. That's $60,000 a year budget. Now, not everybody can afford that, but you can afford $5,000 to encourage your property owners to change out or update their windows. Not if they're historic windows, you just want them to fix them, not replace them. But you can, you know, possibly get signage done, or you can get them to paint, you know, whatever. Just creating incentives. And sometimes if you work with your cities, if they don't already have a facade program of some kind, maybe they'll work with you, and maybe your design committee gets to be the people who make the decisions of who gets the design funds. And then you kind of get to work along with the city to make sure everything's by code, everything is done properly to historic preservation standards. And then you target, oh, I'm in a room where if I don't move, the lights go off. So I'm in the dark. There we go. Sorry about that. Isn't that fun? So the other thing that we can do is target key properties. And we're going to talk a bit about looking at your downtown, your business district, and seeing what are the properties that are kind of your eyesores. What are the ones that stick out and everybody goes, ah, if just that property was done, you know, it would look so much better. And then start targeting that property with, you know, conversations with the property owners. Again, trying to create incentives for them, trying to find buyers if necessary, things like that. So that's another thing to work on. And then motivating other people to make changes. And again, it's the same type of things, creating these incentives. You know, if you go to a property owner, what's in it for them? Often when we're in this field, we think everybody ought to want their downtown or their business district to look better. Everybody ought to pitch in, everybody ought to redo their building, but there has to be something in it for them. And a lot of times, you know, we have to figure out what it is that will move the needle for them to get them to do the right thing. So what are those principles of Main Street design? The first one is collaboration. And it's always great to take a group of volunteers because everybody looks at design with different eyes. It's just like fashion. You know, just go sit and watch people and how they dress. And sometimes you wonder what they were thinking. And it's the same thing with buildings. When my husband and I bought our first historic downtown property, we owned a 3-story Victorian building in our downtown. I had no clue about historic preservation. I didn't know what you were supposed to do and what you weren't supposed to do. I never got that training. And a lot of your building owners are like that as well. So take a group, take a team, and nowadays pretty much everybody has a camera on their phones. Go out and walk. And I will tell you that no matter how big your district or your downtown is, no matter what you're looking at, it will look different when you walk it than what it does when you drive through. And so you should actually do both. But as volunteers, you should go out in teams. If you have a really long or really large corridor, you know, break it up and give everybody sections, and then have them go out and just like, what are the things that make you feel really good, really secure, really intimate in this space? What are the design features that you really, really like? And then if you see some that you really, really hate, take those as well. And we've done this, I've done this with our planners when we first started our Main Streets here in Orlando. And you go back together, you put them up on the screen, everybody's looking at them, and you talk about them. Why is it you hate that? You know, what is the feeling that it gives you? What is it taking away from? How is it detracting from your district? And you build a consensus, and then those are the things that you begin to create projects for, and that's part of your work plan for your design committee. So your projects should all enhance those good things so that people come back and they're like, oh, I really loved the architecture. I really love these wrought iron fences. Whatever those things are, then you create your work plan to enhance those or to incentivize to get more of that into your district. If you have things you hate that are really awful, how do you create incentives to get rid of them? I've seen over the years a lot of people create sign bounty programs, awful, horrible signage that people have. And so we'll give you money towards a new sign if you do it according to the sign guidelines and standards that we have, and then you help them get a great sign. So all of those things. Start small. Someday I will show you all a program, another building that when we started Main Street in my hometown, we had a dilapidated pre-Civil War 4-story hotel that sat on our town square. And from the first day that we started Main Street Galleon, that hotel was on the agenda. We've got to get that done. And it took 13 years to do it. But it was on the agenda at every meeting. And what was the update? And what do we have to do? It was a tough project. But today, it's a senior living facility for 55 and older people to live there. It was an adaptive reuse project that was amazing. But again, you don't start with doing a project like that, even though it's on your agenda and you start working on it. That isn't the first thing that you do and not do anything else. We have to start with small, incremental projects. Remember Main Street's guiding principles of an incremental approach. So what are the small kind of low-hanging fruit things that you can do that are kind of no-brainers? They don't cost a lot. They don't take a lot of human resources to get done. And, you know, look around. What are those enhancements that you can make? Those are the things that you do first before you start working on these massive white elephant buildings or large projects. So what are some of those small things? You can repaint a facade. You can get a team together. Now, there's a whole nother discussion if you're going to have volunteers that are going to do paint projects and planning projects and things like that, you know, about having them sign release forms. Because again, if someone gets hurt, gets run over, you know, whatever, during the time they're working, you know, they can sue your organization. So that's kind of back to that organizational thing that you kind of have to watch. And I see there's a question. We're going to tell you about the recordings later, Tammy. So I'm going to go back to that. I don't know if I can go back to that now. Well, I keep going forward and I can't go back. Let's see. Let's try that again. Okay, sorry guys. So repainting a facade, again, if you have one of those targeted properties that's an eyesore and it needs painted, you know, reach out to the property owner. Maybe they don't have the means to paint it. Maybe they don't have a company that can paint it for them. A lot of times, especially those of you that are in smaller and more rural communities, you don't have a lot of people. The building that I owned, I told you it was a 3-story commercial building. we could not find anyone with a bucket truck or a cherry picker that could get all the way to the third floor. We just didn't have it in our community. And my husband and I certainly didn't have it at our disposal. So, we painted the storefront. And, now that I've been trained for 28 years in Main Street, it's like, oh, how could I have just painted the storefront and not the upper 2 floors? But at the time, as a property owner, we knew the storefront needed done and it was all we could do. So if you can provide those resources or links to people in your community that can help paint facades, maybe even, start a program, and for $5,000, you can do this. I don't know what it costs nowadays to paint a building facade, and I'm sure it depends on the square footage, but it's something that you can do. Plants and planters. We had a project here in Orlando where after 9/11, which is coming up, I believe, tomorrow, the 20th anniversary, but here at the city of Orlando, we had someone in the mayor's office that was afraid of cars that were, able to drive into the city's parking garage and drive onto the city's property with potential, to do damage with bombs. And so they purchased all of these concrete planters that you see in this picture, and they were everywhere because these cars, they had to run over these concrete planters first. And when I came to the city in 2007, the planners were like, okay, this is overkill. There's too many of them. It's too much upkeep, and we want to get rid of them. So they said, do any of your main streets want planners? Now, these things weigh about a ton. So we had to figure out how to get them moved, but we moved them, and we got them into several different of the Main Street districts, and different districts handled them differently. Some of them have their logos painted on them. Some of them have painted them a couple of times, but here you can see where they've done kind of a paint color scheme, and they've also planted what they call pollinators. These are all native Florida plants that attract bees and butterflies, hummingbirds, things like that. So they planted these all through their Main Street because they don't have, any green space. All they have is concrete and asphalt. So to soften that up, they did this, and they called them pollinator pathways. And so now people can walk through their Main Street and they can have the scent of the flowers, and they've created that, Florida kind of landscape in their Main Street. So a lot of Main Streets will do sponsor a planter program. And, here in Florida, we have to look out. These particular planters you're looking at, when this district, Audubon Park, started this, their director went out and bought a golf cart for, I think, like $700 off of Craigslist, and loaded up 35-gallon trash containers on the back. And she would go around to different businesses that had hoses in the back of the businesses, and she'd fill up the trash, big trash bins, and then she would go around and water these every day in the heat. Now, that's a lot of work for an executive director. Some Main Streets can hire water trucks or landscaping companies, or maybe even a retired person who would take care of them for you. I always am really hesitant about saying, oh, well, let's just have the businesses take care of their own planters, because what often happens is business owners have a gazillion things to do, and that's not their priority. And they'll forget, and especially in the Florida sun and heat, couple of days and they're dead. And the last thing that you want, I used to have some really good pictures of dead flowers and planters. That is not what you want in your district. So you have to not only figure out what you're going to plant, how you're going to plant it, but also the maintenance of these when you're doing them. And so you might be able to get people to sponsor them and pay for the plantings. And so you might even be able to get a local nursery to do the planting for you. It all comes down to your resources, both human and financial. Street pole banners, some people love them, some people hate them, but they do offer great wayfinding, great image building for your districts. They also offer color, okay? Trees, gotta have shade here in Florida. We need more trees. And then painting traffic cabinets, which we've done quite a bit of here in Orlando. One of the things I hate to hear from people is, we're going to have a theme for our downtown. You should always avoid themes. You need to preserve the authentic architectural elements that are unique to just your community. You can see in this photo that the National Trust took years ago, we used to see this all the time in downtowns all across the United States, where, you know, especially attorneys would go in and it's like, oh, we have to have a colonial facade. I don't know why, but they did. And this is a false sense of history. The facade wasn't a colonial facade, you know, you're not a part of the 13 colonies. Why you would add this fake phony baloney thing to your history, it doesn't look good. It looks hokey, okay? And so don't try to theme something. Here's my favorite example. My husband used to be a sales rep for a company that sold restaurant equipment and supplies. And when we were first married, I used to travel with him. And Michigan was one of his territories. And this was way before I ever got into historic preservation or Main Street. And he said, I'm going to take you to a place called Gaylord, Michigan. Now, this is downtown Gaylord, Michigan. If you've never been there, this is one of the hokiest places I've ever seen. And I'm sorry if there's anybody from Michigan or Gaylord, Michigan watching, but it's just the truth. Way back in the 70s, when they were trying to combat the malls coming in and what do we do to make ourselves relevant and get more people to come here. And so they did a city ordinance, and I wish I had a picture of their Kmart, but the city ordinance said every single building had to be done in the Swiss chalet style. Now, Gaylord, Michigan has no history at all that's related to the Swiss. There was no reason to do this other than somebody just said, hey, let's just have Swiss chalets. Now, the only thing I could ever figure out was they did have a ski lodge and ski slopes nearby. They may have thought that made them, you know, equivalent to the Swiss Alps. I don't know. But it's just hokey. Look at these buildings. They've added little Swiss chalet features and roofs and things all over the place, and they don't fit. Okay? So themes are not what you want to do. You want to stick with the original architecture, the original style, the original date that the buildings were built, and let the building speak to you about itself. Don't try to make it be something it's not. You should always create compatibility. And so this is one of my favorite rows of buildings in Orlando. It's called Ivanhoe Row, and it's owned by one family. And you can see the compatibility of these buildings. They've even incorporated the awnings into the overall style of the buildings. They're all two-story. They all have that same physical asset. And you can see the building all the way to the right that has different awnings. That's a different owner in that building, but it's still compatible. You can tell it's a different owner. You can tell it's a different building. You can tell it's not a part of Swanson's Ivanhoe Row, but it's compatible with it. And so that's the type of thing that we're looking at. You need to consider things that are complementary. They respect the existing building materials, the scale of them, the proportions, the patterns of the windows and the storefronts, and the detailing and the colors. And this is super important. Now, that doesn't mean everything looks alike. I had a town in Ohio that, I believe it was Bryan, Ohio, that said every single downtown building had to have white trim and white shutters. And did that look boring and awful? So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, again, letting the building's architecture and the surroundings speak to yourselves. But, you know, again, I had one downtown that they had all of these beautiful Victorian historic buildings, and then one of them they painted hot purple. You know, it just didn't fit. So just kind of keep all of that in mind of, you know, everything has a history, has a time frame, it has a certain architectural style, and so follow the lead of the building, always. Here's a good example of not being compatible. You can see what they've done to this beautiful historic building. Look at that parapet all along the top, that beautiful molding. And what did they do? So they've blocked in all the windows on the second floor. Those are all windows that are boarded up. That's real pretty. Looks really inviting. And then look what they did to the storefront. Does that fit? That roof doesn't fit. The storefront windows in the door doesn't fit. The material doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit. I always say, when you're looking at buildings, and my next picture is a good example, if you raised young children, and which I did and watched many episodes of Sesame Street, you remember this song that went, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. And this is what we need to remember when we're working in our downtowns. This is the farther northern side of that Swanson's Ivanhoe Row. And as you saw in the previous picture, everything's 2 stories. The next building's 2 stories. Then it goes plop, 1 story, and then back up to 2 stories. That is not continuity. It's a break, okay? All the buildings along there should have been 2 stories. So I don't know what happened here, if it was a vacant lot and somebody filled it in. I don't know if a former building burned down or, you know, something else happened to it. I don't know what the history of that is. But when the infill happened, somebody should have said, nope, this has to be a 2-story building. And nobody did. So now we don't have continuity. So the number one thing, especially with historic properties, is that we have to avoid demolition wherever possible. You know, here in Orlando, we have a lot of bad buildings that were built that aren't historic. And, you know, it's not a bad thing when they're demolished, as long as what we get is good design and it's a better product than what the old one was. But if it's historic, you need to go through that process to avoid demolition wherever possible. Demolition causes holes in your streetscape, and we call it missing teeth. You know, if you're walking along down the streetscape and you've got building, 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 vacant lot, you know, that's like losing one of your teeth in your smile. People aren't comfortable walking by places like that, and it really takes away from the continuity in your downtown or your business district. You want to strive for continuous facades with existing storefronts. We've got some buildings here in Orlando that drive me nuts. They're almost all owned by AT&T, and I'm certain that the buildings are full of equipment that AT&T needs to run their business. But the problem is there's no windows in these buildings, and they're all just, you know, horrible. And where do they put them? They put them in places where they're very visible. My question is, if you're going to have a building like that, and I'm sure the reason they don't have windows in there is they have to keep all that equipment cool, and in the Florida sun, you know, it costs them more money to cool down computers and technical equipment. I get that, but then don't put the building in a commercial district up front where everybody can see it and they can tell there's nothing in there but equipment, right? So we want to have continuous storefronts where we can have foot traffic and people walking if possible. Continuity builds an attractive pedestrian atmosphere that has an intact street wall, and that's what we want to have. We want to build with quality. Again, this is one of our guidelines and principles in Main Street is, you know, don't use cheap materials and low budget stuff that looks tacky. If you look at the bottom picture here, we see this in a lot of our urban environments, and it's like bad signage, bad materials. You know, it looks awful. It's not appealing, but look at the picture at the top. It's just done with quality. It's good design. The signages, look at that shoe store with the big boot sign. I mean, we don't see that in the bottom picture. We see a lot of cheap plastic signs. You know, the one that has Coca-Cola on it, the reason that discount center got that sign is Coca-Cola did it for free for them so they could have their name on it. We don't want that stuff in our main streets, okay? So don't cut the corners. Make sure you look at good quality design. There's some beautiful buildings in that bottom picture. They're just not used to their highest potential. The other thing I want to say while we're looking at this picture is look at that discount center. How many things can you tape in a window, right? I have literally gone into some of our main streets here in Orlando and introduced myself to the building owners and talked to them and say, you know, I really don't want to be critical of what you're doing here, but You know, all of those taped things you have in your window are really detracting from your business. Can I talk to you about, is there a way we can do this better and still achieve what you're trying to do? That's the kinds of things our design committees can do. You don't want to offend them, especially your business owners. But sometimes, like I said, they just don't know what the right thing is to do. They don't know how to do it. And one of those businesses in our Ivanhoe Village district, the guy wanted to put his menu on the window every day. You know, he wanted the menu. And I said, can we maybe figure out a way we can do a framed menu that's outside your front door underneath your letters, your numbers, street numbers? And then even when you're closed, people could come and they can see your menu and it's right there. You know where I saw that? In Charleston, right? If they're going to do it in Charleston, why not copy it? In Main Street, the best thing we do is R&D, rip off and duplicate. If it's good enough for Charleston, it's good enough for Orlando. Don't copy things though. Don't go into Charleston and say, oh, well, I'm going to do, I can't even think of anything right now, but I'm going to do it exactly what they did in Charleston, and it's something that might be specific to Charleston. Don't do that, okay? Avoid copying the designs of another community, or avoid copying things that work for malls and big boxes and strip centers, right? Every area is different. What works for them, that's not what we do in Main Street. We're like small, intimate, walkable, you know, all of those things are what we want to do. We don't want to copy, you know, the malls and the big boxes. Leverage design qualities that celebrate the unique identity and contribute to your sense of place, and be authentic. So the reason I chose the picture here, and probably none of you are familiar with this, but this is Milan, Ohio, and it is the birthplace of Thomas Edison. And I'm going to get into streetscape and talking about streetlights and things, but another one of my pet peeves is when you go into communities and you can, I used to be able to tell in Ohio, and sometimes I can tell a little bit here in Florida. You can go into a community and right away you know what consulting firm wrote their plan, because they use the same pavers, they use the same light fixtures. You know, I'm a little tired of the acorn lights, okay? It's like we don't all have to look cookie cutter, and we don't all have to look the same. What I love about this was the mayor in Milan, Ohio said, you know what, we're going to be different. They redid their streetscape, and he talked to the lighting companies, and he said, look, we are the birthplace of Thomas Edison. We want our street lights on our town square to have Edison light bulbs as our street lights. They're the only city in the United States of America that have Thomas Edison bulb streetlights. They're the only birthplace of Thomas Edison, right? That is what we're talking about. Do what you need to do to stand out from the crowd and be different and be authentic. No phony baloney, fake stuff, okay? Be realistic. Not everybody has the kind of budgets that it takes, and especially in the next few years, we're all going to be challenged with how we do things and do them well and do top quality. But sometimes it's better to not do anything if you have to do it and it's not done right, okay? So you have to be realistic, though, that in Main Street, one of the biggest rules is that we don't believe in if you build it, they will come. It just isn't that simple. Oh, we're going to build this. I can't tell you how many cities that I know that built minor league ballparks and it broke their city, right? So we have to remember that Main Street is a 4-point approach, all 4 points. If you're not doing all 4 points, just because you have a beautiful, beautiful downtown doesn't mean it's going to be successful, okay? The design improvements alone are not going to reverse an economic decline. We've always said in Main Street, if your downtown or your business district is in an economic decline, that didn't happen overnight. Now, with the coronavirus, it still didn't happen overnight, okay? Some of us are still struggling. Some of us are going to be struggling for a while, okay? But you're not going to fix it overnight. And just fixing the way it looks is not enough. You have to complement that by a sensible business development program. You know, you could have beautiful, beautiful buildings, but if you don't have successful businesses in them, they're not going to stay beautiful. You have to have an aggressive marketing campaign. People have to know you're there. They have to know what's different about you. And you need your Main Street program to be broad-based with participation and support. If you don't have all of those things working together, you know, you can have a beautiful downtown, but it still might not be successful. So be realistic, and remember, you have to work together on all 4 points. So that's education. There's a few other, I want to talk about a few other projects that can kind of come under education. So walking tours, plaques, or markers. So here in Orlando, we have historic walking tours that our historic preservation officer does, and people can sign up to go. That's something right now with coronavirus that you can do. People can mask up, people can social distance, people can do their own self-guided walking tours with the Districts app or another app you might have. Or I know a lot of downtowns that you go into, you can go into the visitor center and they'll give you, you know, the old school headphones and, you know, recorder of some kind that's recorded, and you can do your own walking tour. Making people aware of your history and visitors aware. Right now with tourism, especially in Florida, if you were watching yesterday, the governor is like pushing this drive to Florida, visit Florida, all of this stuff. People are out. I was at Treasure Island last weekend, a few weeks ago. We were at another beach community. People are going. We met people from all over the country that had flown in this weekend. They're coming, they're visiting our towns in Florida. They're getting ready to get snow again, people. The snowbirds are still gonna come, right? So they're looking for things to do while they're here, and introducing them to your town and your town's history is important. So walking tours, you can get plaques made for individual buildings. You put the year the buildings were built and any history, the name of the buildings, and a lot of communities have their own local landmarks distinction. And if they're on the local landmarks, a lot of times your historic preservation office will help you. They may even have a plaque like this designed, like you see for Titusville. And then if it's a famous, you know, Jack Kerouac house in College Park, Jack Kerouac's a famous author. I was surprised yesterday, I did a Google search for Florida historic markers. And a lot of you have these historic markers, right? So doing some kind of tour, putting that stuff on your website, you know, all of that is educating people about your community's history. Giving out awards, whether that award is for, you know, the best private property improvement, the best public property improvement. You know, we had our own awards made here in Orlando, and for years we had our own awards program. It's a little tough after a while when you have 10 different districts, you can only give so many awards for the best Small Business Saturday program when there's only 10 of you. So it got to the point where, you know, we were kind of done. So now we're participating with Florida Main Street in their awards, and, you know, awarding people, especially property owners, each individual Main Street can do that. You can have your own awards every year. Doesn't have to be something big. It can even be a certificate of some kind that people can put on their wall and show. I go into restaurants now around Orlando and different businesses, and I see these awards from Orlando Main Street sitting on their front counters, and it does my heart good. They are proud that they won an award for something. And of course, in Main Street, the #1 award that we can get in Main Street is the Great American Main Street Award. The picture that you're seeing there is from 2001. And that was the year that the downtown I managed won the award, Mansfield, Ohio. And it's an honor to win that award. They only pick, I think, 3 people a year. Our Audubon Park Garden District won one year, and it's an amazing thing to win the award. So that's something that you can aspire to work towards achieving. We only have, I believe, 3 award winners in the state of Florida: DeLand, Fort Pierce, and the Audubon Park Garden District in Orlando. So we can always use more award winners. And I have a training on how to work towards that award to get it as well. So if anyone needs any help with that, I'm happy to help you with that. Also educating news articles. Going back and looking in the archives. Our Ivanhoe district, at one time, there was a place there called Joyland. We found news articles about it. We found photos of it. Some of our businesses in Ivanhoe have these pictures up. They've named things after it. They've researched the history through old articles. You can write your own. You can write your own blogs and talk about these things and share pictures with the community. The next part of design is private improvements. So property owners in your district have their properties that they are responsible for taking care of. Not everybody has 100% of their properties that are actually taken care of in their districts. And like I said, sometimes the property owners may not know what to do. Sometimes it's just demolition by neglect. And so we have to really work with our property owners. And I tell my directors all the time, it's great to walk around your district. You need to walk around your district and know all of your business owners, but you also need to know all of your property owners. This is, I think, a fabulous building in our Paramore area in our city district. And I saw this building the first time my boss drove me down South Paramore Avenue. There was a couple of buildings that just nearly made me come out of my car seat. This was one of them. This building has what we call great bones. It's a fabulous building. I don't know what year it was built, but it's not being taken care of properly, and it's not been given the kind of love and attention it deserves. So this is a good example of what happens when we fill in windows and transoms. And if you don't know what a transom is, it's the windows that are above the storefront windows. So I can't show you as a pointer here, but if you look above the storefront windows and doors and you see that area where they have it boarded off with white, there's windows underneath there. And when the old timers built commercial architecture, especially if it was pre-air conditioning built, they built those transoms in a lot of cases where the transoms opened up. And I learned this the hard way when I had a historic house. The reason in the old days they didn't have screens that were only in the bottom of the windows when they had the double hung windows, they used to have screens that covered the whole window. And what you did was you pulled the bottom window up and the top window down, and it created an airflow where the heat, remember heat rises, the heat would go out the top window and the cool air then would come in the bottom window, and it was a kind of natural air conditioning. Well, people who built historic commercial buildings did the same thing. When they didn't have air conditioning, they could leave their doors open and they could leave the transom windows open. And in a lot of cases, they would have a back door. They would leave all of those things open, and it would create a natural cooling inside the building. So we're kind of almost not allowing the buildings to breathe when we board up windows like this, let alone the natural light that comes in. Now we can have a whole nother discussion here at this picture. And the reason I took this picture to begin with was because of the street trees. And that's something else I'm just going to briefly mention, is that just because it's a tree doesn't mean it's the right tree. And what these trees did here was just cover up the front of this building. Now, if you're a business owner, you know, first of all, this is being used as a storefront church, I believe, and some kind of mission type business. So they're not really concerned with commerce in this building. But let's imagine that there was a business in here that was relying on foot traffic. Where's their signage? How do people, yes.
We have a question.
Okay.
How do we incentivize the owners to elevate their buildings or to get on board with Main Streets?
That's a great question. So, the first thing that you have to do is acquaint yourself with them. Many Main Streets don't ever reach out to their building owners. They don't know who they are. They're not in any kind of communication with them. So, you need to form a relationship with them the same as you do with your businesses. That's number one. And, for those of you that are Main Street directors, and if you're on the design committee and you're working on a project like this, you can't just call them up or, invite them to a meeting or something and then, all of a sudden offend them and tell them their building is terrible and, you need to make it better. That isn't going to work. Okay. So you need to form a relationship with them. They need to know who you are. They need to know what Main Street is, why you're there, what your goals are. So it's communication like everything else in Main Street. You need to capture their contact information, get them on board that they're reading your newsletters, inviting them to your events. If you're doing an annual meeting, and I'm talking pre-COVID way right now, so, we have to adjust everything to that. But, if you're doing some kind of annual meeting, make sure they're invited. If you are giving awards out to property owners who have done the right thing, make sure they know. Make sure they see all of that publicity that the people who are doing it the right way are getting. I mean, there's nothing that incentivizes success more than people seeing other people doing the right thing, okay? Now, sometimes you can do all of those things, and you can create incentives. I truly believe the best thing to do is sitting down with property owners and listening to them and asking them, what made you purchase this property? What did you like about it? Did you purchase it because you wanted to do something specific? In Main Street, sometimes the business owners are the property owners. It's better if they are. Their business will be more successful, but many times they rent the properties. So they're not the property owner. So you need to find out why they own that property. Was it an investment property? Did they purchase it hoping that when they retired, they could sell it or rent it and that was going to help them in retirement? Is it owned by a trust? Are there 15 family members that own it together? Oh, that's a nightmare. I mean, you need to find out what their goals are for that building, okay? And listening. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I know because I'm a terrible listener. But what you need to do is listen to what they tell you. And then you need to turn that in. It's just like a sales call. How can we help you achieve that goal? And then you can tell them, our goal for this area is to make your building one of the key features and gems in our district. Does that goal fit your goal that you just told me? And how do we work together so that we both achieve that goal? It's a constant give and take. I found out here in Orlando, we have a great facade program. And in the Paramore district, we have an additional facade program. So property owners that are in that area can double dip. And they can get quite a bit of assistance from the city to rehab their buildings. There's a lot of building owners that don't know that. So outreach, conversation, relationship building, and then again, we're back to education, letting them know. Now I'm going to show you some Photoshopped things. If you have the ability to do Photoshop yourself, or you have somebody with Main Street that's a volunteer or a company that might do it for you and can Photoshop, you can take pictures like this and you can Photoshop it and show them what it can look like. Because many property owners, they don't have a clue what to do with their properties either. we just have to assume they didn't purchase the property with a bad thing in mind. They had some kind of goal. And so a lot of times, like I said, they just don't know what to do. So we can help guide them and educate them. And I think that's the best way. Now I'm going to tell you something. Sometimes no matter what you do, you're not going to change them. Okay. Some property owners are just holding on to the property for tax purposes. They get to write them off. Now, there are some cities that have enacted, what do they call them? I'll have to think about it. I can't think of the name of it, but they've enacted like a vacant property ordinance. And there are some cities that if you leave a property and you're allowing it to be demolished by neglect, they increase your taxes every year, your property taxes, that you don't do something. And if you look on Main Street America's resource pages, there are some examples of those kinds of vacant property ordinances in there. Sometimes you can't use the carrot, sometimes you have to use the stick. I will tell you what one of my communities in Ohio did, Worcester, Ohio. And I don't know if this is just an Ohio thing. I haven't really seen this in Florida, but in Ohio it was really weird. They would take a building and they would divide the building, and it'd be one building, but it'd have two owners. And so like this picture that we're looking at now, if it had like the exact same other side to a building, like they would sell the building in half and two different people would own it. So in downtown Worcester, there was a building like that, and the one building owner on the right went in and redid the property like you see here and put the windows back in and painted it and did all this great stuff to it. But the left side of the building, that owner didn't do anything. It looked awful. And so the Main Street director, she did everything she could to get the property owner to do the right thing. And he just wasn't interested in putting any money into that building. And so they ended up doing like a story in their newsletter, and it got picked up by the local newspaper. And they were just ranting and raving over how great the right side looked. And they gave the guy on the right side an award. And then they took a picture of the whole property. And then the person in the local newspaper, when they wrote it, they're like, what's going on with the property owner on the left? That's all they said. And the guy's wife saw it, and she was embarrassed in front of her friends that her husband, because they put their names in there, it's owned by, XYZ property. And the wife said, you better doggone well get that other side of that building done because you've embarrassed me in public. So sometimes you got to do stuff like that, whatever it takes, but, be kind and don't be mean. But sometimes you just have to coerce people into doing the right thing. Here's another example of, they've boarded up the windows on the second floor, and they haven't put the signage on the signboard area where it goes, and all they did here was open up the windows, put a great sign, and they must have done a streetscape project, because you see in the picture on the right, they've got a new handy dandy, ornamental street light. So, but look at the difference. Okay. Sometimes it's just color. Sometimes it's as simple as paint, and that's pretty much all they did on this building. Put the windows back in again, put the glass in, look at the transoms, they're painted over in the top picture. They just restored the building, painted the Edward D. Jones and Company on the front, put new glass in the front doors. I'm not sure I'm in love with the light fixtures they put out front, but hey, it looks 100 times better. Now you can see the little mansard roof creeping in to the right in the building next to them. This is often what happens is you do a building like this. I don't know what it would cost to do this. And you notice they kind of took the nasty, hokey, awful sign down that's at the top photo. Look how much better that building looks. And they didn't put a lot of money into that, but it went a long way. And often what happens is then the buildings on the other sides of them, they say, okay, we call it the domino effect in Main Street. When one does it, the next one does it, and then people start doing the right thing when they see how great it is. So how do you get started? A a lot of times the best thing to do is go to your history centers, go to your libraries, go through archives, talk to people that are involved in any kind of historic groups that you may have. Look for old photos. Old photos are amazing to show what these buildings, you'd be amazed what some of them look like underneath all the garbage that's been done to them over the years. So take a look at that. You can see here they've tried different color schemes. They've tried different kinds of glass in the windows, you know, and you can work and you can plan and you can use things like Photoshop. Okay, if you're not good at drawing or you don't have anybody who can do renderings for you, you can use Photoshop. So when we first started Ivanhoe Village, we said, what's the worst building in your district? And this was the winner. And Ivanhoe has some great historic buildings, some great architecture, and then they have this. And I don't know why they have this, but they do. And there's just nothing appealing about it whatsoever. Now I'm going to show you a Photoshop rendering that one of our city planners did. And I'm not saying this is great, okay? But we were trying. So we took the picture and we Photoshopped it. What would this building look like with a different parapet, different signage issue, different storefronts? Now, we even incentivized the owner to do something to this property, went all the way through city council and was approved. And the property manager, he told us there was asbestos behind the storefronts. And so he said it would take up all the money. And so they weren't going to do anything because once they touch it, they have to, you know, encapsulate it and get rid of it to do it environmentally correctly. And they didn't want to spend all the money on that. So the building still looks like this. But you can do a lot to show different things that you can do with Photoshop. Here's another one in Ivanhoe Village. This property owner contacted one of the city planners and I and asked us to come take a look at the building, the restaurant owner, and actually all of this landscaping you see around the corner there is in the city's right away. And, you know, this is a really great mid-century modern building, but you wouldn't know it. I mean, you just can't see its bones. You can't see any of the good stuff at all. So again, we used Photoshop to kind of show the owner you could do something like this that enhanced that banding around the top of the building. You see where it's blue? It's not enhanced with just a, white and black property with the Greek blue and white stripes they're trying to do. This looks way more modern, way better on the building. The people get to sit out, the landscaping looks better. Property owner didn't do this. They didn't do anything. They didn't go through the program, but we tried. And sometimes by doing these things and showing them things, maybe they'll say, well, we don't want to do that, but we kind of have this idea. And you can maybe work with them a little bit on it and get them to do something. Here's an example. Many of you, especially you Florida people, know Jeff Siegler. He just spoke at your conference. This was the town that he was a Main Street director in. Jeff was my predecessor in Ohio. And he was the director in this community, Lancaster, Ohio. And this was one of the bars they had. They called it the Orange Carpet Lounge, although the sun had turned the orange paint pink. And, I don't think they did a whole lot of business. And the Main Street program there, the design team worked with them, and they had a facade program. Now, as soon as this was done, they did nothing else different. The business owner did nothing else different than redo this facade. And he saw an immediate increase of 25% in his business following that. And I always said if he would have opened up the storefront windows and not painted them gold, he probably would have seen a 50% increase. But look at the difference in that building. And what did they do? They opened up all of the windows. They opened up, put the doors back in, put the windows back in, awnings, great lights. It's now an attraction and not a detraction. I think if I would go to this community and I'd see that orange carpet lounge, I don't think I'd want to go in. Would you? But if the storefront windows were open on the picture on the right and you see people in there and it's got great lighting inside, you might be tempted to go in. Signage is something else. I don't find a lot of great examples of signage anymore, but I don't travel like I used to. So these are some very old photos that I've been able to kind of cobble together. You know, we don't have a lot of right of way in Orlando, and so we can't do a lot of trees or a lot of planters or a lot of things like that. But I love what this coffee shop did with combining their planter with their signage. It's got the coffee word on there and the coffee picture with the coffee, and they're using it as the signboard to write their specials on, all in one little space. The next one, they actually, you know, drilled a hole in the sidewalk. They can put that sign in every day. They can take it up every night. The same business, this was a business in Marietta, Ohio called the Twisted Sisters. They're quite the interesting sisters. But they also put out a signboard every day with a different saying on it. And this is one of the things where I say, you know, have fun with this a little bit in our main streets. Make people smile when they come, especially nowadays. People really need something to smile about, something to make them happy. So think about incorporating those kinds of things. But the Twisted Sisters had this out one day when I was there, and it made me laugh out loud. Said, reason to smile. Every 7 minutes of every day, someone in an aerobics class pulls a hamstring. Has nothing to do with their business, has nothing to do with anything, but it makes people smile and feel happy, and that makes people feel welcome to your community. The one at the bottom right is from New Orleans. Every time I talk to Main Street groups, they all want to have better signage like this that tells all the businesses that are in a row, and I just felt like this did it in a very classy way. There's all different ways to do it. You don't have to do it so that it looks like a strip mall and it looks awful. I wanted to take a picture of the strip mall near my house. They just redid it, and they did a really great monument sign that has everybody on there that doesn't look like the old, you know, signs that are just so hobble gobbled. And I didn't get a chance to get it. But you can do better design even with those kinds of signs. Here's some of what I call iconic signage. I don't know if we're going to get to go to Boston for the National Main Street Conference or not this year, but if we do, I would encourage all of you to go see the Golden Teapot. I saw this the first time I went to Boston to National Main Street Conference, which was a long time ago, and this is a very old sign. And it's very iconic in Boston. It actually has steam coming out of the teapot. It's one of the coolest signs I've ever seen. Okay, it's fabulous. Look at the bookstore as the plot thickens. What names of businesses are something else that I'm fascinated with. I think that's a great name for a bookstore. In Colliersville, Illinois, they have the ketchup bottle. You know, some of us are on some of these old historic highways, and especially in Florida, we had some of the coolest, you know, roadside things like this. And, you know, Colliersville has built like this whole following of people who are in love with this ketchup bottle. You know, everybody knows Pike's Place Market in Seattle. The iconic signage that they have, I'm sure when they put that sign up, they didn't think that that was very iconic. It's not real unique or creative, but it's become an iconic part of Seattle. And now when you see pictures, that's what you see when you think of Seattle. And great entranceway signage as well. Eatonville, beautiful entranceway that they have to their downtown. And you know, they talk about the historic town of Eatonville and the years and all of those things. So they're very important. Here's some of my favorite signs in Orlando. I think in the last training that I did, I told you about the Cameo Theater and the Red Light, where they've done these great restorations on historic signs. I love the Orlando Florist sign. It's one of my favorite in Orlando. I'm sure that the downtown skyline doesn't look like that anymore, but what a great sign, you know, showing off the landscape here. Little Saigon. It's those kinds of signs that make things unique. But the Oxford Eye sign is brand new, and they just did a mural on the side of their building, and I don't have a picture of that yet, but what a great sign. And can you tell what the business is inside? Sure you can. It's an eyeglass business. And, you know, one of my favorite projects that I've done since being here in Orlando is being involved in the restoration of our Happy Holiday sign that sits on top of our historic OUC building in Ivanhoe Village. And, you know, all of these kinds of iconic signs in our communities, if you have old historic neon or any other kind of old iconic signage in your community, I encourage you. I had to do some going to battle for that red light sign. Let me tell you, it's worth fighting to keep these things that make our communities unique. Here's some others that I've kind of collected over the years of what I call sandwich board signs. Some people call them A-frame signs, but they're not all A-frames. Again, you don't have to just like buy the standard, you know, signs. If you Google A-frame signs or sandwich board signs, you're going to see some really boring things that you can buy at office supply places. Why do that? You know, let's make them pieces of art and make them unique things in our community. The top middle Salmon Stands Army Navy store, well, their sandwich board is a soldier. Imagine that. I mean, it goes with the business. You know, we've got ice cream cones, we've got chefs, and I found this one in the bottom middle the other day. I loved it. This lady on roller skates, you know, holding their sandwich board sign in front of this popcorn place. How cute. And then our Milk District did sandwich board signs that they could write on with chalk that was made out of a milk carton. I mean, use your creativity. Not everything in our downtowns have to look exactly the same. Okay? The importance of your storefront windows. This business, this international market, came into Orlando. I was working with the planners, and the people who had this market came in to meet with us. And we went out and we looked at their storefront. It's like, it says it's an international market, but can anybody actually tell what's going on in there? You know, they covered every single inch of their storefronts. And when I talked to the owner and said, you know, can't we talk to you about taking these posters down off of your windows and opening up your storefronts? And he was like, no, I have my refrigerators in front of the windows. Oy vey. Who told the guy to block your windows with refrigerator units? It takes 7 seconds for somebody to walk past your storefront and decide whether they want to go in or not. I wouldn't go in here. I don't have any idea. Even though it tells me it's an international market, I don't know what's in there. I can't see inside. I'm not going in. I'm sorry. Do you know how long this business lasted? Not very long. You know, so your storefront windows are super important, and look at the difference. And now I know this is a gorgeous historic building with great bones and great architecture and great windows, but the thing is, it's all open. You can see in there, and you can see what's going on. You know, it draws you in, and that's what we need our windows to do. So this is something as Main Street directors, and again, your design committee can also help with this. You know, I owned a pizza business. I owned a downtown business. I owned a downtown building, right? I am not creative, and I never did anything with our storefront windows. Never. I didn't know to do anything with our storefront windows. I was focused on getting great pizzas out the door, right? So, you know, if you've got people that are good at this, and you can work, if you've got people that work for like Macy's or Nordstrom's or anybody, an interior designer, anybody who knows great design can help with storefront windows. So, you know, you can see the pictures on the left, the creativity that these people have put into these storefront windows. And they've shown what they have on the inside so that people can engage with them. Now, the pictures on the right, I have to admit, I was literally up at 4:30 this morning looking for these pictures. They're very old pictures that I took years ago, and I lost them. And I emailed my former employee who now runs Heritage Ohio. And by golly, at 7:45 this morning, she sent me these 2 pictures. So they're very old. But what I wanted to show you is these 2 businesses are, the top one is a pharmacy, okay? And it's a very old pharmacy in my hometown of Galion, Ohio, and it's called Quay's Pharmacy. And if you see the pumpkins in the front, they have carved out these pumpkins and they say Quay's. And of course, it's Halloween, and you can see they've decorated the window for Halloween. Now, if you're not from Galion, Ohio, you don't get the joke, but I'll let you in on the joke. It says, "Here lies Seaman Drugs, R.I.P. Vons, R.I.P. H&K." Those and Quay's were the 4 independent pharmacies in my hometown growing up. And Quay's is the last surviving one. They're the only independent pharmacy left. And so it was kind of a joke locally, like these are all the other independent pharmacies that went under. And so at Halloween, they made tombstones for them and they decorated up their storefront. None of this has anything to do with pharmaceuticals, right? Or what they sell inside. But tell me, I already told you I'm not creative. Tell me what kind of a storefront window design you do for a pharmacy, right? So having a little bit of a sense of humor, again, and doing your storefronts so people actually want to come see them. I wasn't the only person who went and took a picture of this, right? It was cute. It was a joke. The bottom one is in Vermilion, Ohio, which is a small little town up on Lake Erie. And they have a very large nautical boating history. And I was there doing a resource team visit, and I saw this storefront, and you can't see it very well because there's quite a glare in the glass. But this is an insurance agency. Now, what does an insurance agency do for their storefront? That's another one that's kind of hard, right? So this insurance agency had taken the history of their nautical, maritime, right across the street is their maritime museum. And their whole window is filled with all of these old antique sailboats, fishing ships. And it was gorgeous, okay? The insurance agent in my hometown had their office in an old Sears department store that had been abandoned in downtown. And so they had great storefront windows, and his wife was wonderful. Every single holiday, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, whatever it was, back to school, she would do those windows up, and they were lit. People could see them when they were driving by. And it was inviting, and it was something that people look forward to. Oh, I wonder what she's going to do in the storefront window now. The community that I was a Main Street director in, we had the Mid-Ohio Race Car Course. And it was located in the rural area outside of downtown. But a lot of those people that came to the races came and visited our downtown. So every year they had the SCCA race there, which is the Sports Car Club of America. And those people were there for a week. And so our downtown decorated, as the Main Street director, I went around and talked to all the business owners, and they all decorated their storefronts with a racing theme. Even the bookstore had the windows full of books that were on racing or antique sports cars or whatever. And then we all went together and bought checkered flags, and every single business had a checkered flag hanging outside. Now, you don't think when people drove up our Main Street and they were coming there to go to the races and they saw that they didn't want to stop? We had tons of visitors all week long because of doing that. So, think about that and work with your store owners because, again, many of them, they're not gifted, they're not creative, and they don't know how to do it. So that's another project your design committees can do. This is one of the worst pictures I've probably ever taken, and I will keep this forever as long as I'm in Main Street. Again, out on a resource team. I wish I could remember the name of the town. I don't know where this came from, but this was literally full of dead flies. This was their storefront window. I don't know about you, but I'm not going in. I don't care what is inside that building. I'm not going in when the window is full of dead flies. And, you know, we're kind of in between breakfast and lunch, so I can kind of tell you another bad story. We were in another community doing a resource team visit, and, you know, many times, especially if you have really old historic buildings in your downtown, you can have, you know, lots of really challenging things that come along with those buildings. And in some of the older, you know, more than one story, I would assume, buildings, you can have a pigeon problem. And we had one community, we were walking around there downtown, and we noticed very quickly that they had a pigeon problem. And the entire sidewalk in front of the bookstore was covered with pigeon droppings. And when I say covered, I mean covered. And there was no way you were walking into that business without walking through pigeon droppings. So it was on your shoes, and you walked into the business, and they had rugs. And so they had lots of footprints of pigeon droppings inside their business. And we went in. And it's lovely when you can be the out-of-town expert and you don't know people, and you can tell them things, and then you can get in your car and leave. And so we went in and we talked to the business owner, and we said, tell us about what's going on with this pigeon issue. And she became very defensive and said, oh, it's ruining my business. My business is down 35%, you know, and I can't get the landlord to do anything about it. And I said, what do you want the landlord to do? Well, I want the landlord to, you know, you can put these things on the top of buildings that are like spikes, that don't hurt the pigeons, but they can't land on them, right? Because they don't have a flat surface. So they go find another place. And they wanted the property owner to do that, but the property owner wouldn't do it. And so these pigeons are up there. And I said, well, you know, so if you've already talked to the landlord and the landlord won't put the money into doing it, what's your alternative? Well, I don't know, because I'm losing my business. And I said to her, yes, this is the landlord's responsibility. But if the landlord isn't going to do it, your business is the one that's suffering, right? You're telling me it's already down 35%. If I were you, I would get the money, get with the landlord, figure it out, and fix this pigeon problem, because you know what? You're going to go out of business. The landlord's still going to have the building, right? But you're not going to have your business anymore. This is affecting your business, so this needs to be a business expense. Now, I never did find out if the lady ever did it or if she went out of business, but if you have businesses like that are just going to dig their heels in and say, it's not my responsibility, it's the property owner's responsibility, well, you might be right, but you might lose your business. So cleanliness is huge. People are not going to walk through 2 inches of pigeon droppings to come buy a book from you when they can go somewhere else, or nowadays they can go to Amazon and they don't have to deal with that, right? They don't have to ruin their shoes. So cleanliness is a big deal. And you need to make sure that all of your businesses are doing that. I have to say that during coronavirus, I have been in some cases very impressed and in some cases very disappointed with businesses that were shut down completely. And, you know, everybody was pretty much quarantined. So I don't know if the business owners, some of them thought it was vacation time. They had no revenue coming in. This was the perfect opportunity for businesses that were shut down to go in and do a complete kind of assessment of their businesses and, you know, what needed to be done. I've seen some of our businesses that have taken the opportunity during this challenging time to completely deep clean their businesses and, you know, repaint, pull up nasty old carpet that's needed to go for a long time, put down new flooring, you know, different things that when they're ready to open again, then they're at top notch. Okay. And that's what our businesses need to be doing. So what are some of the like little triggers to motivate other people? And that was part of the question with the property owners is, you know, personal or community pride, if you can hit that point to join their neighbors, and then financial success. And again, you have to know what those trigger points are when you want to motivate them. But many times, if it's going to make them be able to get higher rents or to make more money, that may just be the key that you need. So public improvements, okay? There's a lot of things that can be done with public improvements, and streetscapes are near and dear to my heart. And there's a lot of things that we can do in streetscapes. The big ones, kind of the big ticket things, are landscaping, sidewalks, signage, lighting, and art. Now, you know, again, here in Florida, flowers and landscaping, you know, it's difficult. Things got to have water. And so when you throw in trying to have irrigation on top of buying plant materials or planters or whatever, that's a challenge here. So take a look at it, and how do you achieve that? But, you know, everybody here in Florida appreciates shade. If you want people to actually walk and congregate and come to events someday again and be a part of your district, you need to have it be lush and green. When we had the National Main Street Conference in Des Moines, and again, I've probably lost my pictures over the years, but one of the things I loved about downtown Des Moines, which I was shocked at how great Des Moines was, but they did their planters in their downtown where they had actual edible vegetables in the planters. And if homeless people were there, they encouraged them to take, you know, the edible things. They had lettuces and all kinds of stuff in their planters. I thought it was pretty cool. And then they had like ornamental cabbages and, you know, different things than just flowers. I thought that was very unique. But, you know, our business districts are better places when they have more green in them. They feel more welcoming. Again, photoshopping. We took one of our districts here in Orlando. This is our SODO district back at the beginning, and we were like, what can we do to make this district look better? And you have to start being creative and looking at all the ideas. Now, I will tell you that my biggest pet peeve in the design world, well, probably easiest, biggest, is chain link fencing. And so you see over on the right, that little chain link fence. One of these days that's going to be gone. If, you know, it might be the last thing I do before I leave, but that drives me nuts, you know, that you have a chain link fence in the middle of a business district. There's no business having a chain link fencing is just, that's for farms. You know, we don't need those in our business districts. Okay, so back to the subject. So in SODO, we had the planners kind of sit down and so what would this district look like if we did better sidewalks and we put in bump outs and we had street trees and we actually had our crosswalks designated, right? Do you see the difference? Just from that barren wasteland of asphalt to that. And then we took it one step further, and then what if you have redevelopment that happens? You do notice that in this slide that chain link fence is still there. One of these days. But this even shows you how much more inviting and how it brings the scale back to a human, and no longer is the car like the most important thing in this. It's a business district that people want to be in, right? So we have a NID, which is a neighborhood improvement district in this area now, that's actually doing some of these things. But the first thing that you have to do before you can find the funding to do these projects is actually get a plan. If you have sidewalks and alleys, it's really important to pay attention to those too. You know, you don't have to do brick paver sidewalks. There's lots of other treatments you can do, colored concrete. You know, you can do art in your sidewalks. I'm going to show you a lot of different pictures, and I got to hurry because we're coming short of time and I want to have questions. But great railings, great plantings. The little gate you see on the right is the alleyway. They've put a gate on it and used it for planters so it doesn't look like the ugly alley. Public art projects. This public art project on the left was a preschool that was in downtown, and they had all of the preschoolers do these little art tiles at school, and then they used them in a public art project on their town square. Do you not think everybody in the family is coming to look at their kids' little tile they made? Great way to get people to come to visit. Banners. I'm going to show you a banner project that Oberlin, Ohio did. They actually did a different banner project every year with their high school art students. And here's a picture of one of them. In their art classes, they would come up with a theme every year, and the kids would go to the banner companies, and you can buy blank canvas banners, and then they would paint them. And this particular year, the theme was famous people from Oberlin. You see in this theater, Apollo Theater at the right, that year it was famous and historic architecture in Oberlin. And the kids hand painted all of these. And they went up every year. And the initial idea was they were going to hang them for 3 months. When the weather got bad, they were going to take them down, and then they were going to auction them off and do it as a fundraiser. But the families and the kids loved these, and they had so many grandparents and aunts and uncles coming and taking pictures, and they were so proud of these, and the kids wanted to use them in their portfolios as they move forward in their art life. And so what they ended up doing was taking them down and giving them back to the kids instead of auctioning them off. But a lot of communities have done projects like this where you have, you can go and you can get a banner done, and you can have it say whatever you want to, or, the Main Street America has great affiliate companies that sell banners that you can have banners created. But this is done by your community, by the kids themselves, and it's a part of your community, and what a great sense of pride. You also don't have to have banners go on light posts. We don't have streetscapes in our main streets in Orlando for the most part, and we don't have ornamental lights, and in some cases we've got street lights that are hanging on telephone poles. So we don't always have the greatest places to put banners. You can have banner poles made for your main streets that can hold banners, and they don't have to be on light posts. Again, be creative. Public art. We had a project here in Orlando a few years ago called Sea Art that was all privately funded, but it was all put on public properties. And, here at Lake Eola, we've got a lot of birds, and, it's interpreting what goes on there all the time through art pieces. Many of you are doing mural projects. These are all from Florida Main Streets and Orlando Main Streets. And the art is whimsical. It talks about your history. It's great. It's all beautiful and colorful. Murals are absolutely wonderful, but I want to encourage you again, think about maintenance. I don't know how much money was put into all of these murals and who paid for them. Was it public funds, private funds, whatever? But again, I went to visit, I left being a Main Street director in Mansfield, Ohio, and went to work for the Ohio Main Street program in 2002. So it's been 18 years since I was the Main Street director there. And I went back and visited when I was home last month, July, August. And there were still some of the murals up that I did when I was there 18 years ago. And some of them were looking pretty bad. And, it's better to either paint over it with a new mural or, just paint over the building rather than having a mural that's cracked and fallen apart and looks like nobody cares. We remember quality. We always want things to look nice in our main streets, but these are all fabulous, beautiful, beautiful murals. And then lighting, another pet peeve I have. In downtown Mansfield, they did the streetscape before I got there. And my downtown had beautiful Victorian architecture everywhere. And then they put in colonial lighting. And to this day, it bugs me. So that's one of the things that, if you, here in Florida, we have an awful lot of our Main Street areas that are, more modern. Here in Orlando, we've got mid-century modern, we've got art moderne, we've got art deco. Look at some of this fabulous modern lighting that they have available to us nowadays. We don't have to always do the acorn lights. We don't have to do these gas lights in the top left corner. You know, they don't all have to look historic. You know, you should pick a lighting fixture to go into your Main Street that goes with the character and the design of your architecture and your Main Street. Okay? And the building in the bottom middle, the uplighting on buildings nowadays and the lighting that you can do on the building itself brings so much to your Main Streets. If you have a fabulous building in your Main Street that has fabulous architecture, light it up, baby. Light it up. Okay? It's just that much more of a statement, and people feel way more comfortable there. Bike parking. There is nothing that drives me more crazy than the upside down U's or the circles with the pole in the middle of them for, you know, and they're all black. They got to all be black. They got to all be those two styles of bike racks. I've fought that fight here at the city for 13 years. Bike racks can be pieces of art. You can make a piece of art that goes again with your downtown, with your area, and it can be a bike rack. The only thing you have to remember is the one in the middle scares me a little bit if there's, you know, sharp edges on there. If it's in the public right of way, you got to make sure people aren't going to get cut and, you know, injured on it. And it still has to be functional. It still has to function as a bike rack, right? But it can be art. Utility cabinet art. Never thought I'd do so much utility cabinet art in my career, but there's many ways to get this done. We paint them here in Orlando. I like painting them. I think it makes them more three-dimensional. We coat them with what's called elephant snot after the artists are done, because that's an anti-graffiti coating. I think we've been doing these for 10 years now, 10 or 11 years. We've only had them graffitied a couple of times, and the directors can take graffiti wipes and go out and just wipe it off if they're coated. It has kept these boxes from being graffitied and posters being taped to them. When I got here, these were the awfulest looking things. Everywhere you went, they were just tagged and posters glued to them. And now we've done these things. And when I do public speaking, I've had people come up and tell me, first of all, the one thing is they say, oh, you're the people that did those? I wondered who did those. So if you do them, make sure people know you're the ones doing them. The second thing is, though, people have come up to me and said, I see that box every morning when I leave to go to work, and it makes me smile every morning. That's the definition of success. Okay, that's the type of things that we do in Main Street. Placemaking, super important. And how you do placemaking, there's a lot of ways you can do placemaking. This is one of my favorite projects. In Dayton, Ohio, I had an urban Main Street district there that was the Wright Dunbar district, named after the Wright brothers and Paul Laurence Dunbar. And they both lived there. And so the community decided they were going to do a walk of fame because they had to redo their sidewalks. And so they did the walk of fame, and every year they had a big ceremony, big induction ceremony with who they were going to now put on the walk of fame. And they gave them the stones that you see there for Orville Wright and for Martin Sheen. And those go into the brick pavers, and you can walk all along, and you can take the walking tour brochure, and you can look for, you know, believe it or not, Jonathan, is it Jonathan Fields? Now I forget. Irma Bombeck, Phil Donahue, all those people were from Dayton, Ohio. And I was looking at this for this presentation, and I didn't know Johnny Legend was from Dayton, Ohio. So a lot of famous people from Dayton, Ohio, and it's all in this sidewalk walking tour that they've put together, and it's become a huge thing in their community. The pavers, if you're doing a project, A lot of communities sell the pavers to raise money. So you get people to buy a paver and they can inscribe in it. In my hometown, we did a veterans circle, and you could, put your veteran's name and rank and what branch of the service they were in. We bought one for my father. And, you pay so much money, and it pays for the brick, and it pays for the installation. And it's also a great fundraiser. So it's one way to get that done in your community. And then here's a couple of other placemaking things. You see in the light post on the left, this is Bowling Green, Ohio. Well, they've got light posts, but every single one has BG on it. The Short North in downtown Columbus, Ohio, they went back and looked at historic photos, and they found out that at one time these lighted archways went across the streets in the entire business district, and they'd been taken down years before. And they raised the money, and they had brand new ones made with the Short North sign on it, and they put them all back. And that was an historic, accurate project. All part of placemaking. These are some that some of y'all sent me. Chattahoochee Main Street, their sign is even more historic now because they tell me that that little dent in the top is from a tree that fell during one of the hurricanes, and they've left it there, which I think is really kind of cool, kind of interesting. It gives it character. And then Stewart Main Street had I believe it's a saltfish tour, where they've marked this whole walkway to go and learn about their saltfish history with these saltfish that are all through downtown Stewart. Everybody talks about parking. That's a part of design, what it looks like, what it functions like. So this community had a problem. People said, we don't have enough parking. Nobody ever has enough parking. So they went out and they counted them all. Downtown Stillwater has 1,247 parking spaces, and one is waiting for you. And then they tell all the facts. And then they have a map, and they show you where it all is. A lot of times in Main Street, you don't have a parking problem. If you don't have a parking problem, you have a problem because nobody's coming to your district. So you want to have a parking problem. But a lot of times what we have is a parking management problem. And so managing your parking well, showing people where it is. A lot of times nowadays people have parking apps. They have parking on their websites, their social media sites. Anything to make it easier so if somebody's coming, they know where to go, and they're not going to get a parking ticket, and they're not going to get towed. That's the important thing. So your priorities: consider the need, consider the visibility and the impact. You want to make impact with this stuff. You want people to see it. You want them to talk about it. You want them to tell people, you got to go see what they did in that downtown. And then the feasibility, because funding is definitely an issue. And then you've got to, once again, you've got to have a work plan on how you're going to get it done, okay? Any projects that we do, we don't just sit in our Main Street design committees and go, wow, I wish parking was better. No, you talk about how to make it better, and then you do a plan, and you do a work plan to achieve it. And that is part of your annual evaluation. You must have work plans. And if you don't have work plans, you don't get nationally accredited. And it's important, not just because of that, but you got to have the plan to get the work done. You got to do the plan and work the plan. So that's design. And I believe we still have about 10 minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Just a reminder, you can use the raise hand feature to ask your question out loud, or you can use the Q&A feature to ask a question. Pauline, did you want me to bring Kathy in?
Not yet. We'll see if we need to bring Kathy in.
Okay, Nancy has her hand raised.
Okay.
Nancy, you'll need to unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question.
And tell me where you're from, Nancy. Nancy, go ahead.
Nancy, we can't hear you. Check your microphone setting. under the mute button.
There, she just muted herself. Try again. There should be like 3 little dots with settings, and you might have to change your setting on your microphone. Nope. Okay, Nancy, maybe you want to type it in then. Chelsea is saying she loves the example of the parking map. Can we show that again? Are you asking me, Chelsea, for the one from Stillwater that says they have 1,247 parking spaces? Yes. Okay, let's see if I can share the screen again and bring that back up. And somebody had asked at the beginning, can you see that? Can you see that, Kyle? Is it shared?
Yes, it's up. Okay.
Somebody had asked at the beginning about the recording, and I think last time we had it done in just a couple of days, but I had shared, and I'll have, it'll be shared again on the Orlando Main Streets Facebook page, and on our website, there'll be a link. The city has a YouTube channel, and we've created a Main Street training channel on that YouTube site, and all of our trainings that we're going to be doing will be under there. So you'll be able to access them, you'll be able to share them. So if you have other people from your committees or your board, or if you have new directors that come on board and they haven't been trained in Main Street, you can have them watch the trainings as well. Okay.
Okay, Janice has her hand raised.
Okay, go ahead, Janice.
Hello, I'm from Newberry. My question is on the first training. I did receive an email with the slides. Will we receive another email with the slides so we can download that?
I can send it out.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Kyle's our helpful person who could do that. Okay, Alexis is asking, a number of the historic buildings along my district are private residences. Do the property owners need to apply for the historic plaques themselves, or is this something that the Main Street can do on behalf of the property? I would say, Alexis, you know, if it is, especially if it is a residential, you would need to work with the property owners. You never want to do something and then say, oh, you know, here, we did this for you. That might be very offensive to a property owner. So if you have a program where Main Street's going to help them, or Main Street's going to come up with what the plaques look like, or whatever that is, I would get in touch with the property owners first. And, you know, maybe you have a way, if they become a member, you know, of Main Street program or something like that, that you can help them with their plaque. But I would definitely work with them and not do it, you know, without their knowledge. Someone else says, I did not see anything about creating citywide downtown maps during the presentation. Is this strictly a design committee function, or does it fall under another committee? I would definitely say doing any kind of downtown map would be under the design committee, unless if the promotion committee is doing something to promote the downtown, and as part of that piece, like if it's a business directory, or it's something that has to do with coupons or anything like that, then the promotion committee might want to take the lead. But also, you know, what we haven't talked about a lot is in Main Street, you can collaborate. I mean, the committees don't all have to be in silos. And, you know, like I said before, I'm not really planning to do a transformation strategies training, but if you have that project to do a downtown parking map or any kind of downtown map, that is, for some reason, that is part of your transformation strategies, then you can have all the committees work on that together. I mean, you just do one work plan for the project, and it's delegated out to whoever's going to work on the project. Okay, so things don't have to be, oftentimes our committees can work together because our projects overlap a lot. And a lot of times people they think that anything that has to be designed should be in design. And that's not necessarily the case either. So, oh, and that's Amy from Newport Richey. Thanks, Amy. I hope that answered your question. Candace is asking, I'm new to Main Street, so forgive my lack of knowledge. Nobody knows Main Street when they first start, so don't feel bad at all. But where does funding come from for all these wonderful projects and ideas? I'm assuming from our organization's fundraising events, donors, underwriters, sponsors, etc., and grants. Good question, Candace. And the answer is all of the above. In Main Street, there's a lot of different ways to get funding. But the planning part of it is you usually can't get funding if you don't have the plan. And so then there's the whole other problem of how do you get funding for a plan? And so there's a lot of different ways. A lot of Main Streets have created what's called BIDs, Business Improvement Districts, or NIDs, Neighborhood Improvement Districts. And those take usually a couple of years to get done. And I would say in the environment that we're in right now, where renters aren't paying their rent and property owners aren't receiving rent. And so if you come at them and say, we would like to raise your taxes on your property right now to pay for a streetscape plan, I don't think they're going to like you very well. So you timing is everything in trying to do one of those assessment district funding projects. So, you might want to wait a couple years, but if you can do the planning now, so that when the economy changes, and we're back to where things, are booming again. And in Florida, we've done pretty well in most of our cities with the economy before coronavirus. So, then it might be time to talk about an assessment district. Like I said, with the planners, you can do some kind of sponsorship. A lot of people have bought planters, light posts, benches, all kinds of things where they've, sold them. They've had them sponsored, for $75, you can buy a planter. And you put a little plaque on it, and the plaques don't cost much of anything. So you can put a plan together like that. You can do fundraisers, you can do GoFundMes. There's all kinds of different ways. So I would encourage you, since you're new to Main Street, I know Florida Main Street has a quarterly training coming up, and I'm assuming they do networking, but talk to some of your veteran directors. You have some fabulous veteran directors in Florida Main Street, and we've got some great ones here in Orlando. Reach out to them. You all are talking on these listservs and email blasts all the time. Ask that question to them, and they'll give you some great ideas. They'll give you some great experience of what they've done, and probably share some pictures with you too. So your fellow directors are going to be your best sources of information on that. And don't forget the national listserv at Main Street America, The Point. Ask a question on there, and you'll have people from all over the country that'll answer you too. So that's just a couple of ways. Oh, we got a bunch in the chat room here.
There's one, how do you harness or prioritize ideas to choose as feasible projects?
So we talked about this a little bit last time in organization. So I'm just going to quickly tell you that all of the projects that are done in your Main Streets should be approved by your board of directors. So however you do it, but it kind of should go like this. The committees should get together a couple of months before the beginning of whatever your fiscal year is. And they should say, these are the 3 to 5 projects, however many human people that you have available to you, and so human resources and financial resources to do projects. You figure out how many projects you can feasibly do. And then the committee should talk about, what are the projects we think we can do this year. Now, some Main Street committees will do a 3 to 5 year plan. If your board does a board retreat each year, they may prioritize those during the board retreat and say, these are the priorities of the board. And then they give those things that are under whatever point to that specific committee. So either way you do it, the committee can have ideas and send them to the board and say, these are the things we would like to do this year, and these are the things we think we can do. And you send that work plan to the board with, you know, a budget attached to it, because your board has to decide if they have the money to do that project. And then the board decides the priorities. Which projects do they want you to do, and how many of those do they want you to do? And then they give it back to the committee, and the committee does all the work, and the board keeps their hands out of it and doesn't undo the work the committees do. I think I used the example last time. If the board says we want to do banners, and they give that to the design committee for the design committee to do the banners, and then the design committee comes back and the board takes a look at the designs they came up with, and we don't like those banners, you know, we're going to design our own banners. Well, then what do you need a design committee for? And all of those people that volunteered are going to go, we put all of that time and energy into doing those banners, and then the board undid everything we did? No. If the board wants to be involved, then they need to go to the design committee meetings and work with the design committee. The board does not do committee business at the board meetings. The committees do that. But the boards should approve your projects and should prioritize them. Did that help? Did that answer your question, I hope? Okay. Oh, we got another in the Q&A. Is that a new one? Okay. Oh, my friend Miss Kitty's on here. Yes, Kitty, we will make sure you have the slides and you can see the live video. Kitty Dogood, if you don't know her, don't you love her name, Kitty Dogood? She's the Kentucky Main Street Coordinator for the state of Kentucky. So thanks, Kitty, for joining in. Thanks, Laura. Anybody else have any questions? We're about a minute over. If not, thank you again for being here, and Kyle will get the recording out and get the slides out to everyone. And next week, I believe we have economic vitality. And I know, you know, you all have been so good to sit and listen and participate, and we really appreciate it. And if there's anything, I'm still kind of tweaking that presentation. So if there's anything that any of you think of that you might like to be included in that, feel free to email me this week and let me know, okay? And take care. And everybody, stay safe out there. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.